Hello, I'm Anne-Marie and I'm joined today by Abda Khan. She is a lawyer turned writer who has experience with dealing with domestic abuse survivors. She has also was Lloyds Bank Women of the Future Award and won British Woman of the Year in 2019. And she was shortlisted for Lifetime Achievement Award Law Society Excellence 2020, and she's written 2 novels, Stained, dealing with domestic abuse, and Razia, dealing with slavery. And so welcome, Abda. I nearly called you Razia then.
Thank you. I know a few people have done that before.
So in your experience of dealing with domestic abuse survivors, can you describe how they managed to escape their situations? Are there any particular stories that you have in mind of people that you've dealt with that you could talk
Well,
about?
I think, yeah, I mean, on a general level, I think it's quite hard for victims or survivors to escape, and I think that the figures show that there are many attempts at trying to get away before a woman actually finally manages to get away from an abusive situation. So there's all sorts of things that tie her there. So like finances is one thing. Quite a lot of the time, victims are dependent on the perpetrator for their survival. Really, there's been so many women that I've come across. I did a project called Sidelines to Centre Stage about 2 years ago, in which I worked with um, Women's Aid, 2 of the Women's Aid refugees in Birmingham, and I worked with some of the women, some of the survivors that were in those refugees, and I did creative writing with them, and I also did the same with some women from the Muslim Women in Prison project. So Muslim women who'd been in prison and were being rehabilitated into the community. So for over 8 weeks, we sat down. I encouraged them to write. Some of them could write really well. Some of them didn't have any grasp of English, so I worked through interpreters and so on. And it's amazing the words that were produced by them, because the work was anonymized, so there was no chance of anybody knowing who they were. And then the work was then shared on stage. So I think we had 6 performances where the work was performed by actors, and obviously it was anonymous. So many women spring to mind. I remember this lovely lady from Africa. She didn't speak any English at all, but she was determined to take part in this project. And I remember one of the sessions we were talking about, you know, a, some sort of a childhood memory, and she's so brave. She said, "Oh, I want to write about my FGM," and I said, "Are you sure? Because that must be really like traumatic reliving that. You don't have to write about that. You can write about anything." She said, "No, I want to, because I want people to know um, the harm of it." Now she had been in a very abusive marriage, very violent man, and she had 3 children under 3. And initially she was put into like a B&B in on Hagley Road, if anybody knows it. Anybody knows Hagley Road, you know. She was put in a B&B on the top floor. I think it was the 4th floor. And like I said, it was just a bed sit. There were no cooking facilities in the room. It was just like a bed. She said there were cockroaches and mice. And the thing is that there was no lift, and she had 3 children under 3, and to every time she needed to prepare food or get milk or do anything, she had to go traipse all the way down on the stairs with 3 children under 3, and then all the way back up. And she said that at one point she nearly went back to him. She nearly went back to him because she just thought, at least my children will have a cleaner, better existence in that sense, in the sense that they wouldn't be living in cockroach infested room, and like, and her to be struggling. But she didn't. Luckily, she didn't go back, and it was actually her support worker, and her support worker actually, that helped her get help. And then she was placed in the refuge, and she was waiting for some proper accommodation. So I mean, there's just so many different sort of stories that you could share, but it all evolves around the same thing, which is a concept of one person having power over another, really.
And with COVID, I know there's been a lot of talk around the the escalation in domestic abuse, and I believe that the number of women being killed due to domestic violence has gone up from, was it 2 a week to 5 a week or something like that?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, so it went up from 2 a week to 5 a week in the lockdown, which is like just awful. I mean, 2 a week is awful. Like that's terrible in itself. But then 5 weeks. I did actually. I had COVID last year, and I couldn't really. I was quite ill for a while, but then I couldn't really. There was lockdown, and I felt like I needed to do something. So I did quite a lot of radio um, interviews during that sort of period, just to raise awareness about how people could help somebody who they think might be suffering. Because the thing is, normally these women, if they were to get away, would rely on when the man was at work. Or, I remember once being on the helpline at Women's Aid, and a woman rung in, and she was cowering in the back garden, and she said that my husband hit me in front of my child today, and that's it. I draw the line, and I really need to get help. And she said, I can't talk now, but he's going to go to work in half an hour, and then I will call you back. So, but in lockdown, the women didn't have that opportunity to escape their perpetrator, because they were in the house with them all the time, and the violence just escalated big time. Police had so many more call outs in terms of domestic violence. So there's things that can be done. You can set up warning systems. You can if there's somebody that you trust, you can have a code that you can text them. And there's so many people out there. And obviously, if it's an emergency, call 999. But there's lots of help out there. But sometimes they're very isolated. This is the thing, because perpetrators kind of cut them off from the rest of society, and that's the point, and their family and their friends. And I found this a lot when I worked on that project, that women said that when they got into the relationship, slowly it was like, oh, you can't see that friend anymore. Oh, why do you see your sister all the time? Oh, you're always seeing your mother. So slowly those avenues of support and help were cut off, so that the women felt very isolated. So it's during lockdown, I think the situation just got so much worse.
And what would you say are the warning signs to look out for if you suspect somebody is being abused by their spouse? Is there any sort of, obvious signs that you could see?
Well, I think obviously if they're physically abused, then you might see physical signs of abuse, but quite often you won't see physical signs. But there are other signs, such as social withdrawal, you know, uh, not opening up, not talking about things, canceling meetups, um, and just generally, like, a lot of times it's depression as well. Like, the women who have these issues going on around them then tend to sort of get very down and depressed as well. So there's a whole host of things that you can look out for. But I would say that even people who are delivering newspapers or delivering parcels can listen out, because during lockdown it was really important that those people listened out if there was anything going on, so they could contact the police, because their normal avenues of getting help were just not available, because everybody was just basically stuck inside.
And I just started reading your book, Stained, which is about a woman who's been forced into a marriage. Have you got experience of dealing with women who've been in those sort of situations as well?
Yeah, yes. So Stained is well, I think with Stained, it's about the concept of honor, so-called honor. So she is raped by a trusted friend of the family, and then she ends up in a marriage that she didn't really want, and then it's about the decisions she makes in order to protect this so-called family honor. But yes, I have dealt with a lot of women, young women especially, who have been forced into marriages that they didn't want. I think there is more awareness now about this. I think we are making some progress, but there's still a long way to go, because these kind of cultural practices are quite embedded, and it's about changing mindsets, isn't it? So changing mindsets is actually really hard. Because quite often you're talking to the converted anyway, so it's about reaching those people who are hard to reach. And that's one of the reasons why I do a lot of community radio and community TV, because um, you might be able to reach into their living room and say something that might affect somebody or might help somebody. But it's funny with Stained because, well, not funny, but Stained had quite an impact on a lot of the women who read it, and a lot of women contacted me after reading it, and some of them wanted to share their stories, some of them just wanted to thank me for writing a book about such a difficult topic. But a couple of women contacted me and said that they were going to report their rapes to the police as a direct result of reading the book. And one woman in particular, I talked to her through emails. I talked her through the process. She'd been raped 4 years previously, and she hadn't told anybody because of her, the so-called family honor. She was frightened. She was scared about what she saw as an act of tarnishing the family honor if she dragged the police into it. But she said reading the book really helped her because it's quite a feminist message at the end. It's quite a strong message. And I think what she said to me was, as a result of reading that book, I really do want to go to the police now, and I really do want to try and bring the perpetrator to justice. Whether I succeed or not is a different matter, but I want to try. She was incredibly brave, really. She was still traumatized, by what had happened. And 4 years later, she hadn't told anybody about it. And it's the same. I remember somebody once telling me that their friend had read the book, and then they were sat in the pub, and she told him for the first time. So she was in her 50s. She told him that when she was 14, she was raped by her brother, and she hadn't told anybody because she was basically shut down by the family because she was a vicar's daughter, and all she heard was, "Think of your father's position in the church. Can't tell anybody." So it was swept under the carpet, and I think reading the book then actually got her to open up, and she realized that she had issues that like she did need to talk about, and it's something that she'd buried since she was a teenager, and at that time her needs were never met. It was just hushed up completely. So many cases like that, where girls are made to feel that somehow it's their fault, or if they say anything, then they're bringing shame to the family. And I think that happens in quite a lot of cultures. It's not just like my culture. I think it happens in a lot of cultures where women are made to feel ashamed when they've actually done nothing wrong.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because it's often highlighted about the forced marriages and the abuse and, daughters that have been killed by their parents and things like that. But there's the other side, obviously, in other more Christian religions, there's that thing of shame as well, which people don't really think about maybe as much, or it's
Mm.
not as obviously publicized as much, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, I think every community, to some extent or other, does kind of like uh, I don't know when these situations occur. It's like so there are cases, rape cases, for example, where the judge will comment on the woman's clothing or how much drink she'd had. So this obviously this is not always this is any culture, but it's like, but he raped her. It doesn't matter what she was wearing or how much she drunk. He didn't have any right to touch her without her consent. So this happens so many times. You hear it in judgments, sort of inappropriate comments, and you think to yourself, wow, like we just really haven't come that far, have we? And the conviction rate for rapes is dreadful. It's awful. It's something like just over 1% or 100%. I can't even remember. It's that low. It's really bad. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, and I think sometimes even even the courts who are supposed to be upholding the law and like being fair and reasonable, even the judges in their judgment, actually uh, peddle those stereotypes that if a woman is raped, she must have done something to encourage it. She must have done something to bring it on. Perhaps it was a short skirt, or perhaps she was flirting with him, and what she shouldn't have been. So I think it happens a lot that women are often blamed for violence against them or sexual assaults when it wasn't really their fault. And there's been lots of high profile cases in America as well. I remember the one about the footballer a few years ago, who raped that student. And I think the judge was more concerned about him losing his potential career than the needs of the victim. So, I think it does happen a lot where women are often blamed.
And also they often use, if the woman's been drinking, that's often used against them. And there's a famous quote years ago, but it probably still happens, a judge saying, oh, don't worry, women are like buses, another one will be along in a minute. I don't know if you remember that. I think it was Judge
Yeah.
Pickles.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But yeah, there are definitely inappropriate things that are said in sentences, definitely. Um, and also, I've read your book Razia, which I know you said you did research on, about modern slavery, and I found it fascinating, especially having, as a white woman, having no understanding of the Pakistani culture, the way Pakistan is, and the way you wrote about it. I thought it was very interesting. So in your research, what did you uncover about modern day slavery?
Well, it's interesting how that book came about because I was thinking about what to write about next because I'm very much like an issues writer. So the book that I've just finished writing now, is about gaslighting as a form of emotional abuse. So, but anyway, coming to Razia, at that time I was thinking about what to sort of focus on, and I came across this BBC article online, and it was about modern slavery, and I started reading it, and I just, the more I read, the more amazed I was that I actually didn't know that much about it, and I felt quite ashamed really because I thought I consider myself to be quite an educated, woman who sort of like is fairly in touch with what's going on in the world. But I was really, really shocked to just. And then what I did was I started reading more and more and more. And the more I read, the more I realised that this is a really big injustice going on in this world, locally and globally. And not first of all, not many people know much about it, and secondly, it's important to like amplify these kind of unheard issues and voices. So I started doing my research, and it's. I mean, in the book, I concentrated on only two forms of slavery. One was domestic slavery, and one was bonded slavery. Which a lot of people, when you say, "Do you know what bonded slavery is?" they tend to not know what it is. But it's a sort of form of generational slavery which people are born into, um, and it's where somebody 2 or 3 generations further back will have taken out debt, probably couldn't read, with extortionate interest rates. It's modelled in such a way that their family will never escape the slavery ever. So the story focuses on a family who are slaves at a brick kiln, and that's quite common in South Asia. The brick kilns, and I think that a lot of people don't know about it because the bricks are mainly used for domestic consumption, so they're not exported, so they bypass all the international standards for, worker welfare or children's education or standards or, medical provision or educational provision. So I think as a result of that, I think a lot of the world doesn't know that much about it. But there's so many forms of slavery. It's just unbelievable. So there's forced labor, there's a forced organ harvesting, there's obviously there's sexual slavery as well. And I just discovered so many shocking things when I was reading about it. It's a very much a hidden problem because that's the whole point of slavery. That's the whole point. It's actually the human trafficking is actually the third most lucrative illegal activity in the world after drugs and arms trafficking. So the trafficking of human beings is very, very profitable. Uh, when slavery in the way that we think of it existed, slaves were people actually paid a lot of money for slaves. Terrible practice, but what I'm saying is that people paid a lot of money for slaves. Now a slave is worth about $80. That's, I mean, like a person who's trafficked. That's what they're worth. So if you think about it, I mean, it's terrible. 70% of all human trafficking victims are women, and I think a lot of children are involved in the trafficking of persons as well. And people think trafficking means country to country. It doesn't. Trafficking can be from city to city in one country, or it can be from nation to nation. And trafficking and slavery often go hand in hand because people are trafficked so they can work on slave farms or whatever it might be. And there was a very famous case here in the UK called, I think it was called it was the Rooney case. I don't know if you remember that, Anne Marie, but basically what happened there was I think they were Rooney family. Basically, were very quite, rich as a result of using vulnerable men to lay driveways and patios for nothing. So what they would do is, this is the thing about power, and I think how slaves are recruited is through their vulnerability. So they would often stand outside or sit in cars outside soup kitchens, and they would just look at the young men and they would size them up and think, okay, he looks like a good. So they'd go and talk to him. Would you like a job and accommodation? So if somebody's homeless, they've got no family connections, um, you know, they're at their lowest ebb, then I think it's quite easy to recruit somebody so vulnerable. So they give them this dream that, they're going to provide them with accommodation and they're going to get paid money, and all they have to do is lay these driveways. It's just manual work. Anyway, they kept dozens of these men hoarded up in these tiny little caravans. It was just awful. They used to get beaten up. They used to be abused in so many different ways. And this was here in the UK, and they they didn't get paid anything. They had all their pass, if they had a passport or anything like that, was all taken off them. And they just used to have to lay driveways day in day out over 12 hours a day. And um, when they used to finish laying the driveways, they were transported back to these caravans and locked up. And they recruited so many men like that they would just look for vulnerable people, guys who would fit into that category. And it's yeah, it's really sad.
I do think I vaguely remember that. Yes, it is awful, and you just don't think of it happening in modern society. But yeah, it's quite shocking.
Yeah, you have to be careful because sometimes nail bars, car washes, like, construction industry, beauty industry, they're quite renowned for um, employing, well, I'll say employing, but having people who have been trafficked and who are also kept as slaves. And quite often the victim will not see themselves as slaves because they were made to feel like they should be grateful. Grateful that they're being kept even in squalor, or grateful that they have a job and they're getting food. It's quite often they don't even see themselves as victims. But I think the police now are much more on top of it than they used to be, and I think that every force now has a modern slavery unit where they actually do um, you know go out there and try and arrest people who are involved in this illegal business.
So, in your experience of dealing with not dealing with, but researching on modern slavery, would you say most of it was people coming into this country and being trafficked, or is it a bit of both? Where do you see the problem mainly lies?
um, well, I think mostly I think it would be, but as far as the UK is concerned, I think people coming in really. Having said that, um, I think that a lot of women are trafficked all around the world because the men who recruit them will pretend to be their boyfriends. They will pretend that they're in love with them, and they will, flatter them and all that kind of stuff, and really lull them into a false sense of security. And before you know it, they're working in a brothel, and they're servicing 10 men a night or something, and during the day they're packing bags of packets of heroin. So that's what they're doing at night, that's what they're doing during the day, and they're locked up. This happens here in the UK and it happens abroad. So it's a bit of both, really, to be honest with you. But a lot of people are trafficked here, especially like in the beauty industry and nail industry, from Thailand. Um, and for the sex industry, a lot of women are trafficked from Europe. So it's quite a mixed picture, really, if I'm honest. But it's always tapping into somebody's vulnerability.
You're talking about that reminded me of that famous, well, over here, famous Bradford case of that ring of girls that were, I can't remember what it was called now. There were these schoolgirls that were befriended, and I think they were befriended by going to this chip shop, and then the next thing they knew, they were having sex with these men.
Yes, Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's the classic grooming. And actually, I know somebody recently who was convicted of grooming here in Birmingham, and that takes a lot of courage for the victims to actually speak up. That's a difficult thing because quite often they're young girls, and they feel ashamed, they feel frightened, um, they're kind of like abused to the extent where they don't really have any self, what's that word, any power that comes from within themselves. They're just dominated by the perpetrator. But there's been lots of those kind of grooming cases. Grooming is a big issue with children, but for parents and children. And there's a really interesting case. I always say to parents, how would you know if your child's being groomed? Oh, well, we'd know because we monitor their phone and their laptop and everything. There was one case in which the perpetrator was actually grooming two sisters at the same time. So with the older sister, he was pretending to be in his like 20s, and then with the younger girl who's just like 13 or 14, he was pretending to be 15 or 16. And he had taught them, the girls did not know actually that it was the same person. So obviously they met online, they thought it was somebody their own age. So what he taught them to change sims, so when their mom checked the phone, there wouldn't be anything, any messages, nothing, there'd be nothing untoward on there. So this is the thing. I mean, like the mother said that I thought I was doing everything right. I was checking their phone. There was nothing on there that alarmed me. But that's because they were switching the sim, so they were doing all that stuff on a sim that she had no knowledge of. So it's easy for a perpetrator to come right into your child's bedroom and groom them. So I think it's just raising that awareness that and also grooming in the real world as well. If your child or young adult is suddenly getting expensive gifts, or there's a change in their behavior, if they don't want to hang around with their usual same age friends anymore, then that should set alarm bells ringing as to what's going on, because there's something not right. So that's the sort of thing that we kind of like try and impress on children. A lot of the schools are doing a lot of good work now. I know in Solihull, the schools are doing a lot of good work to raise awareness about things like grooming.
Sharon, do you have any experiences or any questions you'd like to ask? If there's anything from an American perspective.
This is eye-opening. I really don't have any experience with it. I've, just heard things and read things, and it's kind of horrific. And uh, yeah, no, this is very interesting. But I don't have anything to contribute. Listening. Thank you.
That's okay. I think when you were talking about grooming, it's been very prevalent with the social media, people being groomed on social media, thinking they're talking to people the same age, like you were saying. And I mean, I tend to watch a lot of murder programs, and the amount of cases where somebody's been contacted by somebody online and they think there's a case quite recently in this country where this girl was talking to this man who she thought was the similar age to her, and when he met her, he pretended he was the father of the person she was supposed to be meeting. Do you remember that one? So yeah, ended up
Yes,
killing
and
her.
I think that's the problem. It's easy on social media to hide behind a fake photograph, a fake profile. It's easy to build a fake profile. It's just not difficult at all. So I think that's the problem when you're young and you're impressionable. It's that's where the vulnerability is, and that's how girls end up a lot of the times in that situation. I remember once when I was working on the domestic violence helpline, we had a call. Uh, so we had a call from a young woman, and basically she had been trafficked from another part of the country to Birmingham. She said originally she thought he was her boyfriend, and he was really nice to her, and showered her with gifts, and like then convinced her to leave her parents and move to Birmingham. She must only have been about 16 or something. But once she got here, she was thrown into a house with other women and turned into basically a prostitute. She was eventually allowed to go to college, and that's when she contacted the helpline. But what she said was, she said she was really frightened because he monitored everything. So he monitored her phone. So she said, if I come to see you, he'll know, and I will be beaten up, basically. So we gave her all the advice that we could, like how to do it safely, like, to change the SIM or whatever. And she said she'd be back in touch, but she wasn't. And then, which often happens with helplines because it's anonymous. Then about, I think a few days later or a week later, her sister phoned, and she said that this young woman was in intensive care. Don't know what happened, but basically he'd come home and he'd beaten her so badly that she had punctured lungs, she had a head injury, she had broken bones, fractured ribs, broken ribs, and she was on life support. I don't know if she pulled through or not. So I think sometimes when people, when young girls get, because she was very young, she was only 16 when this happened, when she met this boy, a bit older than her. And I think that's that vulnerability that they tap into. And it was so sad, to think that, if, what a waste of a life, a young, beautiful life. So I think at the end of the day, um, I don't know what we can do apart from inform and empower our young people, women, and I mean, boys. There's a problem with the county lines. Boys are used to traffic drugs through various, routes up and down the country. That's another problem. So boys are vulnerable too. So I think it's really, really difficult. And the only way is to keep educating the children and keep asking them to get help if they find themselves in that position.
So if a mother came to you and said they were worried about their daughter, their daughter's boyfriend or whatever, what would be the advice that you give to them?
I think the advice is not to go in all guns blazing, because I think all you're going to do is you're going to send them straight into the arms of the person you don't want them to go to. I think it's important to talk. I think it's important to keep calm. I think it's important maybe even to look for outside help, perhaps as an organization that, maybe even counseling, because there must be an issue there. Maybe there's a problem there. Why the girl has decided to, go out with somebody who perhaps isn't suitable for her. So I think talking is the issue, communication is the issue. And I suppose if she's still at school, like making the school aware. Um, but I think talking is the most important thing, because often if communication breaks down at home, then that makes the child even more vulnerable. And you'll find that a lot of the grooming cases were girls in care who didn't have that family support, who didn't have that network. And we know that people who have family support and a network around them are probably less likely to to find themselves in that situation. Not always, you can never generalize, but I would say, it does help to have that family network and that support around you.
I was going to say, the little I've heard about it is a lot of drugs involved
Yeah.
and people abandoning their kids, younger girls, in their early 20s. And I had a neighbor that told me about it. And they tried to rescue her, and she didn't want to be rescued because it was the boyfriend type situation.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
even though they prostituted her, but a lot of drugs.
Yeah. And also they yield so much, they wield so much power. And I think the victims have become completely powerless. And it's difficult to explain to somebody who's not in that situation, obviously, because you have to be living that situation to know what it's like for you. So yeah.
No self-esteem. It seems like
Yes,
something there was a
yes,
problem
yes.
before, and so yeah, it's really sad. Like I said, the little, and then here, I'm sure it's probably international, but all the conspiracy things of what's going on, on a larger scale. I don't know how much of that is true, or it always seems to be hushed up, and
Mm,
more conspiracy than anything else. But
yeah.
it just seems very frightening
Very,
that would
yeah, definitely, yeah, yeah.
happen.
communication, education is the key, and I think that there's so much pressure on especially young people these days with social media and advertising, and there's this desire to like have the perfect body, the perfect face, um, and it starts younger and younger. I found that younger and younger girls and boys actually, because boys, they've got the pressure to look buff and well toned and muscular, and I think that it's a bit dangerous, that because celebrities, their pictures, as we know, are highly edited, and they probably look nothing like that. So we kind of look like we kind of look right now. there's no there's no kind of like filters on us or anything like that, but we know that those images that that young people look up to are often really not very real, not real at all actually. So I think that there is a bit of pressure on the industry. I don't know whether the industry will, and I feel like the pressure does work, because I think once upon a time we only saw, well, in America you'd call them size 0 models, but here probably would say size 4 or 6 models. But now I think we do see plus size models as well. I feel like when I look at the billboards, I feel like there is more representation of all sizes rather than just that really thin size. So I feel like that, hopefully, if we can keep going on at these issues, like, because I think that mental health of young people has really suffered during COVID as well. So I think all these extra pressures really don't help them. It's not been a really good year for youngsters, really, with COVID and being off school, and I think it has affected their mental health quite a lot. There's definitely been an increase in mental health referrals generally since COVID, a big increase. So I suppose it's going to take a while for society to adjust back to. I don't know if we'll ever be normal again, because I think COVID's here to stay for a while, in one shape or another. So it's just adjusting to a new normal, I guess.
And have you been doing any homeschooling of your own since COVID?
Well, my youngest is 15, so he's quite self-sufficient. So he has actually finished his GCSEs now, so he's actually not at school anymore. But he was bored when he was off school, and he'd often say, "Oh, I'm just so bored of sitting in front of a screen." And I think that we know for our own mental health generally, like if you spend too much time in front of a screen, it's not good. And we would always tell the kids, don't spend too much time in front of the screen. But then when COVID happened, we were saying to them, right, you've got 8 hours in front of the screen, and that's just not good, is it? So I know we didn't really have a choice. I think it was, the situation was what it was, and I think everybody just tried to deal with it as best they could.
Oh, that's lovely. Lovely advice. Sharon, have you got anything else you'd like to add? No? Okay. In that case, I think I'll wrap it up if that's okay, Abda, unless you've got anything else you'd like to talk about.
No, it's been great. I think I've been chatting enough, haven't I? So give our listeners a break. But no, thank you for inviting me on. And
That's
I think
okay.
that, yeah, I know this is slightly different to what you normally do, but I think we both thought that maybe sharing the experiences of other people might be useful in,
Definitely, yes.
and often people don't know about these issues, or maybe they've heard about them, but they never really heard about real life examples. So hopefully somebody out there has found it useful.
I hope so. I'm sure they have, yes. Anyway, thank you very much for your time, Abda and Sharon, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.